Well, welcome to the Convene podcast. We're here with Brad Dacus, the president and founder of Pacific Justice Institute. Brad, welcome to the broadcast.
Oh, it's great to be on the program, Greg. Thank you for the opportunity.
We have really what I think is an exciting moment to clarify. There is a lot of confusion on the part of a lot of people. The Biden administration has ordered U.S. companies with 100 or more workers to ensure their employees are fully vaccinated or regularly tested by January 4th. And that kind of pre-date is coming really soon, or has come, depending on when you're hearing this podcast. But vaccination in general is a bit of a corporate America dilemma. Petitions are circulating, I understand, today at Google, where Google employees are saying, hey, we don't want to be vaccinated. Religious accommodation issues are out there. The U.S. Court of Appeals has weighed in. The Sixth Circuit, the Fifth Circuit, people are confused about that. There's been a pause on OSHA enforcing the mandate. The Sixth Circuit might keep it in place, they might not. On November 23rd, which per our moment in history here is yesterday, the Biden administration asked the federal appeal court to immediately lift the pause. Justice Department told the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit the threat to workers is overwhelming. Offices are reopening. Business leaders need to know what to do. Brad Dacus, Pacific Justice Institute, help us clarify.
Certainly. I want to say I thoroughly agree with the Biden administration's observation that, yes, there is a serious threat to workers. That is their ability to keep their jobs and have their freedom and dignity preserved. So I see it a little differently, but sort of a tongue-in-cheek there. But I think that it sort of stepped back. What the president's trying to do, he's trying to issue a what's called an emergency temporary standard, an ETS. This is something that the executive branch presidents have used in the past under certain circumstances, like emergency circumstances, to push things through that otherwise would seem out of a protocol or procedure. In this case, it's dealing with his mandate to have OSHA require all employers with over 100 employees to have all the employees vaccinated. Of course, this is of serious concern for many employers who know for a fact that they would lose a lot of their employees. They'd be economically hit, as well as many employees would be in a situation where they'd be having to move to or to get a job somewhere else, perhaps. The Fifth Circuit, as you just mentioned, granted a stay, saying, hey, wait, we'll hold off OSHA. Don't implement this. We're not respecting you or ordering you not to implement this yet. We see constitutional problems here. And then they had a hearing on it, and the Fifth Circuit said, yes, we're issuing a stay. Do not implement this. We have some constitutional problems here. Then the number of circuits, these cases were being filed by a number of states. So what they decided to do, the federal courts, when you have like a number of different circuits all dealing with the same issue, which has an impact on all of them, is they often will consolidate. And that's what they did. They drew straws, and they picked the Sixth Circuit. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals is interesting. Prior to the Biden administration, it was definitely leaning to the left, if you will. It was not a pro-religious freedom circuit. Now things have changed dramatically. President Biden had a lot of appointments to the Sixth Circuit dramatically, and therefore the Sixth Circuit has now flipped. The majority is decisively composed of judges who respect the Constitution, who acknowledge fully the concept of limited powers, limited government. And I think that there's a very good probability that the Sixth Circuit will, in the end, allow the stay to stay into effect from the Fifth Circuit. That's my speculation. Also, at the end of the day, this is going to be brought before the Supreme Court. I believe the Supreme Court, I think we've got the justices there, the 5, maybe 6, that will also strike this down, this ETS by the Biden administration. and prevent the OSHA from carrying out this mandate. One of the big rubs with this mandate is that it's really not about worker safety. It's not about employment safety. First, 100 employees is arbitrary and capricious. Why not 50? Why not 1,000? Why 100? And then second, I mean, if they're really truly health and safety concerns, why 100? Then second, the Biden administration in a tweak, we often hear of tweaks being a hindrance to the former administration. Well, this is a tweak to hinder this administration. One of their staffers, not Biden himself, said we couldn't order everyone in America to be vaccinated. We don't have the constitutional right to do that. So this is an end run around this to order businesses to do it under the context of health and safety. I mean, that administration has already acknowledged what their intentions are, and I think that the courts will look at that, continue to see it for what it is, and strike it down and as an abuse of power and unconstitutional overreach by the executive branch. So that's what I think is going to happen. And if that happens, we still have states that are pushing mandates, like regarding health institutions, medical institutions. We have Pacific Justice Institute. We have offices coast to coast, Miami up to Boston, Seattle, Southern California, and many, many places in between, and 20 offices in 16 states. And so we have lawsuits filed across the country because of mandates dealing with different entities, firemen up in Washington State, nurses and doctors in Michigan and New York. And then in Southern California, we have police officers. And then we also have a major lawsuit we filed in Miami on behalf of parents not wanting their children to be forcefully vaxxed. That's a real important lawsuit we have down there against the school district. So these things are still going to be going on, even if this OSHA mandate is discarded. And what's significant is for employers to understand that if they do not have a mandate, this is really important. If they do not have a mandate from a governmental entity to require vaccinations, and they go ahead on their own and they require vaccinations for the COVID-19, they are not protected. They're not shielded from liability. So if you have an employee who has a serious reaction, by the way, over 700,000 people, according to the Federal Viral Register, VAER, have reported serious reactions, strokes, seizures, etc., paralysis. Then they can file a workers' comp claim against that employer. Over 18,000 have died from the vaccine. This is not my numbers. This is the CDC's, the VAER have acknowledged this. So there's a heavy liability with employers who actually mandate and have no actual governmental requirement to do so. And so we also, though, have employers who are saying, wait a minute, if I don't take precautionary measures, even if I do, I can have an employee come in and say that they got COVID and they got the COVID-19 virus from someone in the workplace. And many states, it's sort of the burden on the employee, but in California and some of these blue oppressive states, I call them, the fact is there's almost a presumption that whatever they say is true, and the employer has to prove that they didn't get it from the workplace. So employers have a definite concern, and what I recommend them to do, we recommend on our website, we have a great resource. Just put vaccine exemptions, click that, and we have a box for employers. We talk about steps they can take to implement procedures that are reasonable safety procedures to minimize that risk, at the same time not opening up a door for liability that comes through an absolute mandate with regard to employees.
Got it. So take us to the Monday morning after the court decision that is upcoming. Let's pretend that the Supreme Court or the Sixth Circuit or whatever says all bets are off, the vaccine mandate was unconstitutional. What should an employer of less than 100 employees do?
Right, and I will say this: either if OSHA's taken off is stayed, it's unconstitutional, then employers, including those with under 100 employees, they have freedom. to decide what they want to do. And they can decide to go ahead and issue vaccine mandates with their employees, but we already talked about the risks involved there. They also need to assess whether there's any state government or county authority or city authority that has pushed such a mandate on them with regard to the vaccine. So just so that even though the federal government may be out of the picture, that doesn't mean that the state OSHA, that many states have their own separate OSHA, if you will, Occupational Health and Safety Administration, may have something just as rigorous or even more rigorous. So you need to look at that. Also look at any state statutes, and then also any local mandates by public health officers and by their county or by their city. And they need to look at that now. If at the end of the day they still have freedom, if you will, then they need to adopt policies that will be reasonable for health and safety. But at the same time, what we recommend is not be an absolute mandate, because once they do that, once again, they're bringing on liabilities.
Okay. A lot of small business with an HR director looks to the SHRM website, the HR professionals. Here's what their website says. EEOC has periodically updated its guidance. The agency said that the federal anti-discrimination laws it enforces do not prohibit employers from requiring employees to be vaccinated. Employers that encourage or require vaccinations must consider reasonable accommodations for people who refuse to get vaccinated, like pregnancy issues, sincerely held religious beliefs, unless an accommodation would cause undue hardship for the business. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first there's medical exemptions. They didn't mention people who've had COVID. If people have had COVID, if an employee comes to a boss and says, hey, I've had COVID, here's my antibodies test saying that I have the natural immunities. Here's a letter from my doctor that says that I don't need the vaccine. In fact, they prescribe me not to have the vaccine because the vaccine can actually create complications, unnecessary complications, even weakening of the immune system if they've already had COVID. So if you have something like that, could be also a medical exemption as well. They need to treat medical exemptions very seriously. Once again, if they don't and that person has the vaccine to keep their job, there's a complication. We're talking about liability, and there will be lawyers competing to take on the lawsuit. So that's real important. On the religious side, religious exemption, I'm glad that the EEOC acknowledged that, because that's very, very important for employers to understand that this is a matter of the federal law under Title VII that requires Section 701J, that requires employers to reasonably accommodate the sincerely held religious beliefs of employees. And so if an employee is able to prove that, then the employer, and if the employer cannot reasonably accommodate it, they have the burden to prove that they can't reasonably accommodate, that there's an undue burden or hardship. Here's the problem, though, is that if an employer makes that assertion and that employee has already been working safely at the office for a matter of months, maybe 18 months or 2 years, and they've been wearing a mask, doing social distancing, maybe even having regular checks, for tests for the vaccine, for the virus, then they're gonna. It's really very problematic for them to say, "Oh yeah, it's an undue burden." Suddenly, what's changed? What's caused it to be suddenly an undue burden? The employee's doing a fine job, still doing a fine job. So I think that's going to be very problematic for employers who go down that road. They're opening up the door for all kinds of lawsuits for not engaging in reasonable accommodation of sincerely held religious beliefs. The employee has the burden to prove sincerely held religious beliefs, but once the employee has proven that and just made their statement and expressed their faith that they wrote out themselves, then the employer needs to make a good faith effort to reasonably accommodate that and move forward.
Okay, let's speak to the employer who is got a deeply held religious belief. Let's say hypothetically they said, I will never tell my employees to be vaccinated. Since the government is telling me I have to, I'm going to shut down my business. We just won't do it. What would you say to them? Maybe they don't have to do that.
Yeah, maybe they don't. Hobby Lobby was a business that was told that they had to provide abortifacients to their employees via the insurance policy that they were going to provide, health insurance policy. And this was pursuant to President Barack Hussein Obama's legislation and that he was pushing. And as it turns out, Hobby Lobby says we will shut down all of our stores before we in any way assist in the killing of precious preborn babies. It violates our beliefs, our religious convictions. We will not do it. And they filed a lawsuit. 5-4, the Supreme Court ruled that Hobby Lobby is a person pursuant to the free exercise clause and the rights that persons have with regards to religious freedom, and also pursuant to specifically also to the RFRA, a Religious Freedom Restoration Act, that they are persons, and that's the argument that they made, and the majority of the Supreme Court agreed with that. So fast forward, how does that apply to a business where they have sincerely held religious beliefs? We're not talking about a corporation with lots of stockholders and it's real blurred who is the company, but this is a family-owned company or very closely held company that where the family has been very outspoken, very demonstrative of their religious belief, maybe as Christians perhaps, and so they can make such an argument, and they can contend this violates my religious beliefs to mandate these vaccines, which I have a conviction from God is not good, is not right, and is something that God does not want me to do. Would they have a case? Yes. How would it turn out? There's no guarantees. Okay, I'm going to make that really clear. We have had some changes on Supreme Court, I think for the better, but still, we have no assurances and guarantees of how that would turn out. In that scenario, if an employer did go down that road and wanted that kind of protection, they should contact us at Pacific Justice Institute. We do our work completely without charge. We pick up all the costs and expenses on the front end as far as from the client, and then we would have to pay court fees, filing fees, court reporter costs, et cetera. And we don't charge at all for our work. So we would likely take on that case and take that to Supreme Court. We encourage them to work with us and talk with us beforehand, before going down that road. There may be some left and right turns they might want to do preemptively to give them the strongest position to be able to make that kind of an argument. There's a second alternative, though, that they have, which is a lot easier, and that is they can go ahead and announce to their employees, pursuant to, say, let's say OSHA goes into effect. I don't think it's going to prevail, but there's still a chance. Let's say it does, or let's say they're in a state that's mandated it, or they're, in some capacity required to do this. They can announce to their employees pursuant to the state statute or whatever. I'm having to require all employees to be vaccinated. In addition, our employees will also be respectful of your rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And the ADA, that applies to medical exemptions, and say, if you have a medical exemption, please file those and state what your reasoning is. If you have a letter from a doctor, please include that as well. And then you don't have to require a letter from a doctor. And then as far as religious exemptions, this is something you need to type or write out, explaining your personal, sincerely held religious beliefs as to why you do not why you can't take this vaccine. And now it's, with the exception of Washington State, the general rules that it's up to the employer to be able to make that decision. So you look at them and you decide, do I want to accept or reject this? And you can accept every single one if you want. You put it in a file, and you just make sure that every employee either fits in one or two categories. Either they've had the vaccine or they have an exemption. And if they fall under one of those two, then you're covered. And I really don't think there's a very much of a likelihood the government's going to come and scrutinize what was said in the religious exemption request or the medical exemption request. But you need to make sure there's something in writing to protect yourself in that circumstance. That's an easy way to deal with it. And is very accommodative. You may have an employee who is very critical and says, well, I'm afraid that I'm going to catch something. I've already been vaccinated. I've had COVID, and I've been vaccinated, I'm wearing a mask, but I'm just afraid, you're sitting me next to someone who's not vaccinated, and I'm just really worried. Well, engage in reasonable accommodation for them. Try to say, okay, look, I'll put you somewhere else. We'll work with you and put you here, but we need to comply with all the law, and that includes Title VII and the ADA, as well as whatever mandate you're dealing with regards to the vaccine.
Got it. Okay, let's flip the tables a little bit and speak to the employee who might be listening, who is working for an employer that is requiring the vaccine.
Yeah, employees, in fact, and I want to remind people again, on our website, we have it's real clear what the employer is supposed to do and how they are to protect themselves, what the employee is supposed to do, how they lay claim to rights to a religious exemption under Title VII, military personnel, how we have the guidelines for each of the branches of the military, all laid out there. And then also what college students can do, what their rights are, and then what parents can do to protect their children from being forcefully vaxxed all the way down to the age of 5. So on our website, we've got lots of information. We have a 28-page Q&A dealing with vaccine mandates. It's being updated regularly by our legal team. So take advantage of those things. This is more of a summary for you to have a big picture of what your rights are. So as far as employees, let's just, I'll sort of deal with some of the issues that goes into line there. First, the employer may tell you, don't even bother filing religious exemption. It's not going to be accepted. You file it anyway. It's legally, you need to file it if you're going to have protection and a wrongful termination action later on. You definitely want to file it. Also, you may be someone who has gotten a form letter. Maybe your pastor forwarded it to you from a law firm. This we've seen this happen. It's all pre-done. It says all your religious beliefs. It's all prepared for you ahead of time. You just sign your name and date it. That is worthless. Legally speaking, it's practically worthless because you have a burden as an employee to show your religious beliefs. That's your burden. And it really doesn't show the sincerity of your religious belief, your sincerity. If you're signing something that was written by someone else, you may not even know who wrote it. That doesn't really prove anything. It just shows you know how to sign your name on a document. So you need to write it. It needs to come from your heart. Don't copy and paste from someone else. That's number one. Then what do you prepare on it? Well, first, don't talk about the law and the Constitution, our founding fathers, because that's not a sincerely held religious belief. That only draws into question whether you're really actually just upset about your constitutional rights or is it your religious beliefs. You want to stay focused on your sincerely held religious beliefs. Also, don't go over into talking about the medical risks and the studies and the harms and the over 18,000 who died from the vaccine. That's not your sincerely held religious beliefs. Stay away from that. Start off first, I recommend, with your testimony. Great opportunity, folks, by the way, to share your faith. Your testimony, how you became a Christian, what Christianity means. To most Christians, it means it's a personal relationship with God. As you deal with issues and things, you pray, you seek God's direction, and the Holy Spirit gives you confirmation and direction. So you want to talk about that, use scripture, give examples of how you've practiced that in the past, and then apply it to this situation, how you've prayed about this vaccine, and similarly, you feel convicted by the Holy Spirit not to take it. I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm just saying this is what the norm is often used. And then state that also you're willing to agree to reasonable accommodations to sit down with the employer, because the employer has an obligation to sit down with you and to try to work things out. If they don't, they're violating Title VII. And some employers have just flat out denied the exemption request without trying to work it out. And that's unfortunate for them. But you want to make it clear you're a team player. If you work in an isolated place or from your home, state that on there. Say, by the way, I never ever have interaction with customers or other employees. I work out of my home office, or I work in a separate cubicle. It's separate, and during the graveyard hours, we had someone deal with that who was that situation. So you want to say that. You also want to mention again if you've had COVID and have your antibodies and a letter from a doctor, if possible, saying that they prescribe you not to have the vaccine because you don't need it. You have a stronger and broader immunity because your pre-existing condition, your COVID exposure, and then also your willingness to wear a mask, your willingness to be tested regularly, your willingness to engage in social distancing and any other reasonable requirements. You want to have that put on there, and then at the bottom you mention Title VII, that this request is being made pursuant to Title VII. On the one deal with your health medical exemption, you want to have this is being made pursuant to my rights under the law, including the American with Disabilities Act. And you file those and with your employer. And if your employer says verbally, oh yeah, don't worry, yeah, we've accepted it, but the deadline's coming and you don't know if it's been accepted, when they tell you that, immediately get to your computer, memorialize what was just said, and say, hey, dear HR, thank you for assuring me just now in the hall that my religious exemption has been accepted. It's really reassuring. I can move ahead now, and thank you for that assurance that you just gave me. I just want you to know how much that personally means to me. You're memorializing what she just told you. And if she doesn't respond and say, oh, no, I didn't say that, or I misunderstood, then that is sort of memorialized that that's what happened. And if they change their mind, then the question is, well, why'd you change your mind? What did she do to make you now believe that she wasn't sincere? What action did she take? What did she do? Or you just simply deciding to be intolerant, even though you earlier acknowledged that she had sincerely held religious beliefs. So that's something else to take into consideration as well. But we have all those materials and resources on our website, pji.org. We never charge for our work. We greatly appreciate people and businesses that do support us, but it's never required, and we're here to serve you without charge.
Brad, thanks very much. And I know you've got some resources at pji.org. Can you just give us a quick snapshot of what people will find there that will help them with these issues?
Yes. Well, first off, they'll find information about our Zoom calls, and we have those every other week, and we're dealing with these issues, dealing with the mandates, oftentimes addressing the business issue. So if you want sort of an ongoing update regarding that, that's one thing you can do. Also, you can sign up to get our Legal Insider newsletter. It's once a week. It's short. It's to the point. It's emailed. I encourage you to do that. And we're also having town hall meetings in churches and places, dealing with large congregations in towns and communities. I've been very busy doing that. We can, if you want us to do something like that for your company or your employees and give them this information on what they need to do. If you're sort of unsure about saying it the right way, we can help you, and we'll do that without charge as well. But then we've also got, outside the vaccine issue, we've got a valuable training, two-part training video called Faith in the Workplace, Part 1 and Part 2, and it trains employers and HR all the different ways you can legally evangelize your employees, your customers, your community in really exciting, creative ways. And we encourage you to look at that. And also you can sign up to get our Faith in the Workplace quarterly newsletter. That's also giving information along the lines of the recent vaccine mandates and how that applies with regard to OSHA and companies, but also other issues affecting companies as well. And then we've got something we're working on that should be coming out by the end of next year. And it's a harassment training video. The reason we produce this is because so many employers, ourselves included, we're all required to have these kind of harassment training videos to all our employees. Some states it's every year, every other year. It varies. But what's out there is garbage. I'm just going to be blunt. It's often bigoted against people of faith, mischaracterizes people of faith. It's very radical in its very leftist in its sexuality positions. And so we decided, well, why? Why don't we just make something that will meet the criteria so employers can use this, especially Christian employers, and not have to worry about false indoctrination or false information, that actually can be something very constructive, in particular, not only dealing with the mandatory issues, but specifically addressing the issue of religious freedom and religious accommodation in the workplace in a very positive way. So that's what we're in the process of doing. Once we finish that, we'll be rolling it out and modifying it to the different state standards across the states, across the United States. And we look forward to getting that out. That's going to be a very valuable resource for employers, but also for so many employees who are Christians and don't want to be sit through an indoctrination propaganda media material regarding harassment. So
great.
Yeah.
Well, Brad, thank you very much. I just love the story of how you founded Pacific Justice and how you help people at no cost. There's pro bono, low bono, and no bono, which is the Pacific Justice Institute plan. And we're very grateful for your partnership with Convene. And let me just speak to those of you who are listening and you're saying, wow, this sounds great, but I feel like I'm going it alone, go to convenenow.com. That's convenenow.com. And you can find a group somewhere in your area or a virtual group that can help you go through things like this vaccine requirement with a group of people who are just like you, who care about work, who care about faith, and want to make a difference for the kingdom of God. So Brad, again, the website pji.org, and for us at Convene, convenenow.com. We're very grateful for all the work you do, and we look forward to seeing what the results are in a few weeks for this vaccine mandate. Thanks for being on the broadcast.
No, thank you, Greg. Keep up the great work. I appreciate it.